My grandson pushed me down the stairs. That's how my story begins. Not with a gentle fade, but with a jarring, brutal shove. They laughed. They called me dramatic. 2 weeks later, I made them regret it. Every agonizing step of it. This isn't a fairy tale of happily ever after, nor a gentle reminiscence of twilight years. This is a story of reclaiming power. When those who should cherish you most betray you instead, it's about the silent screams ignored, the boundaries shattered, and the ultimate defiant roar of a woman pushed too far. You think you know what happens next? You don't. Because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed, but smiling at you across the dinner table. And sometimes a quiet old woman discovers a strength within her that can move mountains. Or, in my case, dismantle a family. My name is Eleanor Hayes, though most call me Ellie. At 72, I was a woman of quiet routines, surrounded by memories in a house that held more history than its current occupants seemed to care for. My late husband Arthur had filled its rooms with laughter and warmth, and after he passed, I clung to its familiarity, a comfort against the encroaching silence. But that peace, fragile as old lace, was slowly being shredded by the very people I was supposed to hold dearest. My son Mark, his wife Brenda, and their 10-year-old son, Lucas. Lucas. The name itself felt like a tightening knot in my stomach. He wasn't the sweet, innocent grandchild I'd dreamed of. No, Lucas was a storm. Contained poorly, barely. His mischief wasn't the harmless kind. It had an edge, a deliberate cruelty that chilled me to the bone. It started subtly. A misplaced item here, a scratched piece of furniture there. Then it escalated. The neighbors' complaints became more frequent. Broken windows, trampled flower beds, the unsettling whispers of small animals being tormented. Mrs. Gable, bless her heart, even called me once, voice trembling, describing Lucas throwing rocks at her beloved Tabby, Whiskers. Brenda, of course, dismissed it all. That old bat needs glasses. Ellie? She'd snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. And you need to stop criticizing my parenting. Mark, my son, my only child, was no help. He was a man made of good intentions and thin air, utterly incapable of standing up to Brenda's domineering personality or Lucas's increasingly disturbing behavior. He'd just offer a weak smile and a noncommittal shrug, perpetually avoiding conflict, even when it meant sacrificing my peace of mind. "Let's just enjoy dinner, okay?" he'd say, waving away my concerns as if they were pesky flies. But how could I enjoy dinner when the very air in my home felt thick with an unspoken dread? The incident with the porcelain vase was the turning point, the stark, brutal awakening. It wasn't just any vase, it was a delicate blue and white piece, carried across an ocean by my grandmother, a tenacious immigrant who'd arrived on these shores with little more than hope and that precious family heirloom. 5 generations of Hayes women had cherished it, a tangible link to our past, a symbol of resilience. Lee placed it carefully on the antique side table in the living room, a place of honor. Lucas, during one of his unsupervised rampages through the house, picked it up. My heart leaped into my throat. "Lucas, darling, please be careful with that," I pleaded, my voice thin. He didn't just drop it. He looked directly at me, that unsettling half smile, a twisted grimace that promised malice spreading across his face. Then he let go. The porcelain shattered across my hardwood floor, its delicate pieces scattering like confetti, each shard a tiny dagger piercing my soul. "Oops," he said flatly, his eyes challenging me to react, daring me to challenge him. I stared at the destruction, a silent scream building in my chest. Then I looked at Mark, who was, predictably, absorbed in his phone, scrolling through some endless feed of nothingness. "Mark," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "the vase?" He barely looked up. "It's just a vase, Mom, just a vase." "Just a vase?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief and a rising fury. "Like your grandmother was just an immigrant who carried it across an ocean? Like your mother was just a widow who refused to sell it during the Depression?" Brenda, ever the protector of her destructive offspring, set down her wine glass with exaggerated care, a theatrical sigh escaping her lips. Not this again, Ellie. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys? My grandson had just willfully destroyed a priceless family heirloom, a piece of our history, and that was her excuse? The blatant disregard, the casual cruelty? It was a slap in the face. It was in that moment, staring at the shattered remains of my family's legacy, that I knew something had to change. The comfortable illusions I had clung to, the hope that things would improve, crumbled into dust. As surely as that porcelain, my home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battleground, and I, it seemed, was fighting a war I hadn't realized I was in. The quiet fear I'd lived with was quickly morphing into something else entirely. A simmering rage, a fierce determination. I just didn't know yet how terrifyingly close to the edge that rage would push us all. The air in the house grew thick with an unspoken tension after the vase incident, a silence that felt heavier than any argument. I tried to talk to Mark to make him see the insidious shift in Lucas's behavior, to understand the growing chasm between us. But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears, bouncing off the wall of his convenient obliviousness. Brenda, on the other hand, was an active participant in my erasure, her disdain for me growing as palpable as the spring humidity outside. My existence in my own home felt like a forgotten shadow, tolerated at best, an annoyance to be managed at worst. Then came the day that would forever cleave my life into a before and after. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were usually quiet. Mark and Brenda were at work, and Lucas was supposed to be at school. I was heading downstairs, planning to tackle the endless laundry that seemed to multiply overnight. The morning sun, usually so welcoming, cast long, distorted shadows across the wooden steps. I reached the third step from the top when I heard it. A soft thud behind me. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. There, standing on the landing, was Lucas. He should have been in school. His eyes, usually a flat, unreadable blue, were alight with something primal, something utterly devoid of childish innocence. A flicker of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. Before I could utter a single word, before I could even process the image of him standing there, his small hands, surprisingly strong, connected with my back. It wasn't a playful push, it was a deliberate, forceful shove. Time seemed to distort, stretching into an agonizing eternity. My feet slipped on the polished wood. A gasp tore from my lungs, thin and reedy. The world tilted violently. The banister, usually so solid, offered no purchase. I felt myself tumbling, a rag doll thrown down a flight of stairs. Each thud against a step sent a jolt of searing pain through my body, a symphony of breaking bones and tearing muscle. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the ceiling spinning wildly, and then the blur of the foyer floor rushing up to meet me. Then, nothing. I awoke to the blinding white of a hospital room, the acrid smell of disinfectant stinging my nostrils. A dull ache throbbed through my entire left side. A nurse, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, was checking my IV. Miss Hayes, you're awake. How are you feeling? Like I was hit by a truck, I rasped, my throat raw. What? What happened? Sarah's expression softened with concern. You had a bad fall, Miss Hayes. Your grandson called 911. You have a fractured hip and a broken wrist. My grandson called 911. The words echoed in my head, cold and disbelieving. Lucas. He had pushed me. And then he called for help? A chilling thought snaked its way into my mind. Was he trying to appear innocent? Or was there a flicker of regret in that dark heart of his? Mark and Brenda arrived soon after, sweeping into the room with an air of forced concern that felt as artificial as a plastic rose. Mark, ever the picture of paternal distress, wrung his hands. Oh, Mom, thank God you're all right. Lucas was so worried. Brenda, however, had a different agenda. Her eyes, narrowed and calculating, swept over my bandaged arm and the contraption stabilizing my leg. Honestly, Ellie, at your age, you really need to be more careful. Lucas said you just lost your footing." Her voice, though feigning sympathy, carried an unmistakable undertone of accusation. Lost my footing? My blood ran cold. She knew. They knew. Lucas must have told them, or at least confirmed her suspicions. Yet, they were already spinning the narrative, twisting the truth to protect their precious son, to protect their carefully constructed facade. "He pushed me, Brenda," I said, my voice gaining strength, though my body still screamed in protest. "Lucas pushed me down the stairs." Brenda scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on my raw nerves. "Ellie, please. Don't be so dramatic. He's a 10-year-old boy. He wouldn't do that. You must have just stumbled." She gave a condescending smile, the kind that implied I was old and senile, imagining things. "It's common at your age." Mark, my spineless son, nodded weakly in agreement. "Yeah, Mom, Lucas was really upset, said he saw you fall. He's just a kid." The betrayal hit me harder than the fall itself. Not only had my own flesh and blood physically assaulted me, but my son and daughter-in-law were now actively participating in the cover-up, denying my reality, gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind. The pain in my hip was excruciating, but the pain in my heart was 1,000 times worse. They weren't just protecting Lucas, they were protecting their own convenience, their own image, at the cost of my dignity, my safety, my very sanity. As days turned into weeks in the hospital, the physical pain became a dull roar, but the emotional wound festered. They visited sporadically, bringing meager gifts and offering empty platitudes. Their visits felt less like expressions of care and more like surveillance, ensuring I wasn't making a fuss. They were already discussing my future, as if I weren't even in the room. "She can't possibly live alone now, Mark," Brenda declared one afternoon, not even bothering to lower her voice. "With that hip, she'll be a liability. We'll have to move her in with us." Mark, ever the eager pawn, nodded. "It makes sense, Mom. For your own good, we can keep an eye on you." For my own good? I knew what that meant. It meant control. It meant they'd have unrestricted access to my finances, my property, my independence. I was trapped, broken, and at their mercy. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I had to get out. But how? My body was weak, my mind a tangled mess of pain and fury. Lying there, helpless, as they plotted my fate, I felt a cold resolve harden within me. They thought they had me. They thought I was old, frail, and forgetful. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The game was about to change. The hospital room, once a symbol of my confinement, slowly transformed into an unlikely sanctuary. The initial shock and agony had begun to recede, replaced by a dull, constant throb in my hip and wrist, a physical reminder of what had transpired. But beneath that pain, a different kind of sensation was stirring, a white-hot core of fury, an icy determination. They thought they had me. They thought I was an inconvenience to be managed, a frail old woman whose mind was as fractured as her bones. They were about to learn that old trees, even when battered by storms, can still sprout new, unyielding roots. My first ally, unknowingly at first, was Sarah, the night nurse. Sarah was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a quiet attentiveness that spoke volumes. She'd noticed the way Mark and Brenda's visits were strained, the way Brenda's eyes would linger on my medical charts, the way Mark would subtly steer conversations away from Lucas. She'd seen the fear in my eyes when they were in the room and the palpable relief when they left. One evening, after Mark and Brenda had departed with their usual perfunctory goodbyes, Sarah sat by my bed, adjusting my pillow. "As Hayes," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "if there's anything at all you feel uncomfortable about, please don't hesitate to tell me. We have resources here to help." Her gaze was direct, empathetic, and without judgment. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I felt truly seen. Her words were a lifeline. I didn't blurt out everything then and there, but a tiny seed of hope was planted. I began to observe Sarah more closely. She was discreet, efficient, and seemed to possess an innate sense of justice. Over the next few days, I tested the waters, asking subtle questions about patient rights, about legal avenues for elder protection. Sarah, without breaking any hospital protocols, provided me with general information, pointing me towards patient advocacy groups and legal aid services for seniors. She never explicitly acknowledged my implied accusations, but her actions spoke volumes. As my physical condition improved, my mind, sharper than they gave me credit for, began to race. I started piecing together a plan, a quiet, intricate web of actions designed to reclaim my life. The first step was accessing my finances. Brenda had been managing my bills and accounts for the past few years, ever since Arthur passed, under the guise of helping me out. Now it felt like a cage. I feigned forgetfulness, a convenient excuse to ask for bank statements and investment portfolios. "Oh dear, I'm so forgetful," I'd tell Mark and Brenda with a saccharine smile. "Could you bring me those papers? I just want to review them, for old time's sake." They, too confident in their control, brought me the documents, smugly believing I was merely reliving past glories. But I wasn't. I was studying every line, every transaction, every number. It became chillingly clear. They were systematically siphoning funds. Not huge amounts that would trigger immediate alarms, but a steady, insidious bleed. Payments for house maintenance that never happened, consulting fees that lined Brenda's pockets, and alarmingly, significant withdrawals marked Lucas's future fund. My future, it seemed, was their piggy bank. The college fund was the ultimate slap in the face, a future built on my pain, paid for with my money, while I lay broken. That night, alone with the glow of the bedside lamp, I made my first decisive move. Using my phone, a device Brenda had initially scoffed at me for owning. "Ellie, you barely know how to turn it on." I located the number for an elder law attorney, Sarah had subtly suggested. Her name was Evelyn Reed. Our first conversation was guarded, my voice raspy from disuse, my words carefully chosen. I didn't accuse, not yet. I merely laid out the facts. The fall, the family's dismissive attitude, the sudden need for me to move in with them, and the odd financial discrepancies. Evelyn was sharp, perceptive. She didn't press, but listened intently, her questions probing and intelligent. "Minna says," she said, her voice calm and steady, "it sounds like you're in a very vulnerable position. We need to act carefully and discreetly." Discreetly. That word resonated deeply. My plan had to be built on stealth, on their overconfidence, on their belief that I was a harmless, doddering old woman. I would play the part to perfection while still in the hospital. And later, during my initial recovery at their house, which was still my house, a fact they seemed to conveniently forget, I continued to gather intelligence. I paid attention to their schedules, their habits, their weaknesses. I began documenting Lucas's aggressive outbursts, not just for the legal case, but for myself. A grim ledger of their disregard. I even started leaving a small voice recorder hidden in my room, just in case. Paranoid? Perhaps. But I wasn't just fighting for my money, I was fighting for my dignity, for my right to exist on my own terms. The feeling of helplessness slowly began to recede, replaced by a surge of purpose. Each small, secret action, a phone call to Evelyn, a notation in my hidden journal, a subtle observation of Brenda's routine, fueled my resolve. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist, and my unsuspecting family was about to walk right into my carefully laid trap. The day of reckoning arrived with the stark clarity of a winter morning. Evelyn, my attorney, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a steel-trap mind, had advised me to prepare. Prepare, she said, for their shock, their anger, their inevitable attempts at manipulation. I had done more than prepare. I had rehearsed every scenario, every accusation, every cutting remark I knew Brenda was capable of. I was no longer the frail, intimidated Ellie. I was Eleanor Hayes, and I was about to reclaim what was mine. The setting was my living room, the same room where Lucas had shattered my family heirloom. The air was thick with unspoken tension, heavy with the weight of impending revelation. Mark and Brenda sat opposite me, their usual smugness a thin veneer over an underlying unease. They thought this was just another family meeting, perhaps about my care, my finances, all topics they assumed they controlled. Evelyn sat beside me, a quiet, reassuring presence. "Thank you both for coming," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands that I'd hidden under the lap blanket. "I've asked Evelyn here to help us discuss some matters." Brenda's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion sparking in them. "Matters? What matters, Ellie? We're perfectly capable of handling your affairs, as we have been." Her tone was patronizing, designed to dismiss me before I even started. "Actually, Brenda," Evelyn interjected smoothly, her voice calm but firm, "Ms. Hayes has some concerns about how her affairs have been handled." She then laid out the evidence, calmly, methodically, the bank statements annotated with discrepancies, the detailed records of the withdrawals from my accounts, the consulting fees with no discernible services rendered, the alarming transfers to an account vaguely named Lucas's Future. Mark, predictably, spluttered. "Mom, what is this? Lucas's fund is for his education. We were just trying to be responsible." "Responsible?" I finally cut in, my voice rising, the carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. "You call draining my retirement, my life savings, responsible? While I lay broken in a hospital bed, barely able to move, you were plotting how to pilfer my money for a boy who deliberately pushed me down the stairs." The words hung in the air, a grenade thrown into their carefully constructed illusion. Brenda's face contorted, a mask of outrage replacing her initial smugness. "Ellie, how dare you? You're old, you're confused. Lucas is a sweet boy. He would never do such a thing. You fell. You're just trying to get attention." "Paul Shannon?" I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed in the silence. "The only attention I want is for you to admit what you've done, and for you to get out of my life, permanently." Evelyn then delivered the coup de grace. "Ms. Hayes has decided to make some immediate changes to her estate planning. Effective immediately, all power of attorney has been revoked. All joint accounts are being closed and transferred to her sole ownership. Furthermore, given the circumstances, Ms. Hayes has chosen to remove Lucas from her will entirely, and the college fund that was established using her funds has been liquidated." The color drained from Brenda's face. Mark looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his jaw slack. "Liquidated? You can't! That's Lucas's future." Mark stammered, his voice filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. "It was Lucas's future," I stated, my voice cold and hard, a steel edge I hadn't known I possessed. "But his future was built on my broken bones, on your lies, on your theft, and I decided that future was no longer worth funding." Brenda, recovering from the initial shock, exploded. "You evil old woman! How could you do this to your own grandson? After everything we've done for you!" She lunged towards me, her face a mask of pure venom. But Evelyn suddenly stepped forward, a silent barrier. "Everything you've done?" I spat, rising to my feet despite the lingering ache in my hip, my gaze unwavering. "You've isolated me, lied to me, stolen from me, and covered up the assault on my person. You've done nothing but consume, consume, consume. This is my house. These are my resources, and now they are no longer yours to exploit." The next hour was a whirlwind of accusations, denials, and legal pronouncements. Brenda screamed, Mark pleaded, but Evelyn remained resolute, presenting the facts, the legal documentation, the irrefutable evidence. There was no denying the signatures, the bank transfers, the police report I had quietly filed after the initial fall, detailing Lucas's presence and my strong suspicion, a report that now, with Evelyn's leverage, would be taken seriously if they resisted. Finally, defeated, humiliated, and stripped of their power, they left. It wasn't a graceful exit. Brenda cursed, her face red and contorted with fury. Mark, utterly broken, could only murmur a pathetic, "How could you, Mom?" as he followed her out the door. Watching them walk away, their shadows lengthening in the afternoon sun, a strange wave washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not entirely. It was a profound sense of emptiness, but also, surprisingly, a vast open space. The burden of their presence, of their deceit, had lifted. The battle was over. The house, once filled with their oppressive energy, now felt quiet, breathable. I had taken back what was mine, not just the money, not just the house, but myself, my self-respect, my agency, my life. And though the path ahead was uncertain, the air tasted of freedom. The silence that settled over my home after Mark and Brenda's departure was not empty, but profound. It was the silence of a slate wiped clean, a canvas awaiting new colors. The house, once heavy with the weight of their resentment and deceit, now breathed with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. My first act of reclamation was to literally clear the air. I opened every window, letting the crisp autumn breeze sweep through, carrying away the stale energy, the echoes of their arguments and dismissive tones. The physical recovery was a journey, slow and arduous, but each step was a victory. The fractured hip healed, the broken wrist mended, leaving behind a persistent ache that served not as a reminder of my weakness, but of my resilience. I enrolled in physical therapy, diligently performing every exercise, determined to regain my independence. The therapist, a young woman named Clara, often remarked on my fierce spirit. She didn't know the half of it. My spirit had been forged in fire, hardened by betrayal. With my physical strength slowly returning, I turned my attention to my sanctuary, my home, and my garden. The garden, once my pride and joy, had been neglected during the Reign of Terror. Weeds had choked the roses, and the once vibrant flower beds lay barren. It became my new project, a metaphor for my own life. I spent hours digging, pruning, planting, pouring my renewed energy into nurturing beauty from neglect. I chose hardy perennials, resilient plants that would return year after year, much like my own enduring spirit. The act of turning the soil, feeling the rich earth beneath my gloved hands, was deeply therapeutic. My social life, which had withered under Brenda's possessive control, also began to blossom anew. Sarah, the kind nurse who had been my first unwitting ally, became a genuine friend. We'd meet for coffee, sharing stories and laughter. She introduced me to a book club at the local senior center, a vibrant group of women, each with their own rich tapestry of experiences. I found solace and connection in their company, women who understood the complexities of life, the quiet joys and the unexpected challenges that aging brought. One afternoon, during a particularly lively discussion about a novel on resilience, Martha, one of the book club members, raised her glass. To Eleanor Hayes, she toasted, her eyes sparkling, who reminds us that our third act can be our most powerful. As conversation flowed around me, I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months. The path from victim to victory hadn't been straight or simple. I still carried scars, both physical and emotional. Trust remained a carefully guarded commodity, given conditionally rather than freely. Yet the woman who had emerged from that crucible was stronger than the one who had fallen, more discerning in relationships, more confident in boundaries, more purposeful in actions. I had learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my peace over their expectations. I had learned that my home was a sanctuary, and only those who honored that sanctity were allowed within its walls. Later that night, alone in my home, now truly mine again in every sense, I stood at my bedroom window, gazing at the garden I'd replanted. Spring bulbs were emerging, their tender shoots pushing determinedly through still, cold soil towards sunlight and possibility. At 75, I had finally learned what had eluded me my entire life, that validation comes not from others' approval, but from honoring your own truth. That family can be chosen rather than merely inherited, extended beyond bloodlines to those who offer genuine love and respect. That boundaries aren't selfish, but essential to self-preservation. And that sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is simply saying, "No more." Eleanor Hayes, I whispered to my reflection, my voice firm and clear. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that statement felt completely, unquestionably true.